History is full of secrets, but few are as buried, distorted, or misunderstood as the intimate world of the samurai. We imagine them as iron-willed warriors bound to the sword and to death, but there was another code, whispered in private, written in hidden scrolls and practiced in shadows behind temple walls. A code so taboo today that even historians hesitate to speak of it plainly. This was a world where affection could shape loyalty, where intimacy was a tool of discipline, and where bonds between men were tied not only by steel but by emotion, mentorship, and power. For centuries, officials erased it. Scholars downplayed it. Modern ideologies rejected it. Yet the evidence remains, quiet, persistent, stubborn as the warriors who lived it. Tonight, we step into a realm the samurai never intended the future to see. A world of secret vows, coded desire, and relationships built not on fantasy, but on necessity, survival, and the strange ethics of a warrior society. This is the lost sexual codes of samurai Japan, the story historians don't teach. To understand the world we're about to enter, one must forget the modern image of the samurai, stoic, chivalrous, bound purely to honor. That version is a later invention, polished by the Meiji government and Western Romanticism. The real samurai lived in a fractured, war-torn Japan where death was common, emotional bonds were strategic, and isolation shaped every aspect of life. Such an environment, intimacy of any kind, was not simply personal. It was political, psychological, and deeply practical. Medieval Japan was a male-dominated world where young warriors spent most of their lives in all-male environments. Barracks, mountain temples, night watches, war camps. Women were often distant, both physically and socially, especially for adolescents being raised among monks or retainers. Emotional development happened within tightly structured hierarchies, where older warriors guided younger ones, not just in combat but in behavior, etiquette, and discipline. In this context, relationships could become layered, intense, and sometimes deeply personal. The practices we call wakashudō, the way of youth, did not emerge from perverse intent, but from a complex blend of mentorship, status systems, emotional bonds, and the psychological realities of war culture. These relationships varied dramatically. Some were symbolic, some affectionate, some exploitative, some spiritual. The lines between loyalty, mentorship, and affection blurred in ways our modern categories struggle to describe. But over time, as Japan embraced Neo-Confucian morality, Western influence, and modern state ideology, these traditions were pushed underground. Scrolls were burned, diaries were edited, families censored old documents. Entire chapters of samurai life were quietly erased to preserve a tidy national myth. Tonight, we reconstruct what remains, not to sensationalize, but to understand. The Forbidden Scrolls, what samurai never wrote publicly. Samurai culture produced a vast body of writing, war manuals, poetry, moral treatises, letters, and death poems. Yet, when it came to intimate relationships between men, especially those tied to mentorship and hierarchy, the writing became carefully coded. In official chronicles, these bonds were rarely mentioned. When they were, they appeared as ambiguous references to special companionship, loyal affection, or shared spirit. These euphemisms concealed more than they revealed, hinting at a private world that was understood socially but never openly declared. Why the secrecy? Not because such relationships were universally condemned in medieval Japan, far from it. For centuries, these bonds were integrated into warrior culture, especially in monastic environments and military academies. But samurai society placed immense value on reputation. Breaking ranks, displaying emotion, or allowing personal affection to overshadow duty was considered dangerous. So the intimate dimensions of these relationships were left to the margins. Private journals, poetry between trusted partners, or philosophical scrolls, never meant for the public eye. Some of the richest evidence comes not from the warrior aristocracy, but from temple archives. Monastic traditions were more willing to write openly, though still in symbolic language, about emotional bonds between an elder monk warrior and a youth under his guidance. These texts describe affection as a method of discipline, a bond of loyalty, a training mechanism, and occasionally a spiritual path. But even here, the writing avoids explicit detail, framing everything within aesthetics and moral metaphor. Modern historians examining these fragments face a difficult task, understanding a system of relationships that was simultaneously accepted, regulated, and deeply hidden. The samurai lived by masks of duty, control, and impassive resolve. Behind those masks lay a world they rarely documented directly, because they believed it needed no explanation. Everyone inside the system already understood the rules, and everyone outside it was never meant to know. And so, the forbidden scrolls of samurai intimacy remain partial, fragmented and incomplete, yet powerful enough to reveal the shadows of a culture the modern world almost erased. Before bushido, the older warrior cultures that shaped samurai intimacy, long before the samurai developed the warrior code we now call bushido, Japan's military class was shaped by much older traditions, cultures rooted in clan warfare, mountain asceticism, and imported martial ideals from China and the Korean peninsula. These earlier warrior societies viewed emotional bonds between men not as scandal, but as strategic cohesion. In the absence of modern state structures, loyalty had to be personal. And personal loyalty often grew strongest between individuals whose lives were entangled through training, shared danger, or spiritual companionship. These early warrior groups rarely lived in proximity to women. They traveled constantly, trained under harsh masters, and spent months or years isolated in mountain barracks. In these environments, relationships formed based on hierarchy and mentorship, older fighters guiding younger ones, not just in combat, but in discipline and conduct. Emotional closeness was seen as a natural outcome of constant proximity. If two warriors marched together, slept in the same quarters, trained under the same master, and faced death side by side, their bond was inevitably deeper than written rules could define. This bond was mirrored in Chinese and Korean monastic traditions, where brotherhood was seen as both spiritual and social. When these traditions filtered into Japanese religious military institutions, they blended with local culture to create something unique, a belief that a strong warrior was shaped by the guidance and affection of another who walked before him. This wasn't always romantic, it was structural. It ensured loyalty, cohesion, and discipline within a volatile warrior society. When the samurai emerged as a distinct class, they inherited this entire ecosystem of male bonds, some militaristic, some philosophical, some deeply personal. The result was a relationship system that modern terminology struggles to categorize. It was not hidden in early eras, nor was it celebrated openly. It simply existed, woven into the very fiber of samurai training and identity. Before bushido rigidified samurai ethics, this older warrior intimacy system was fluid, normalized, and part of how young fighters learned what it meant to serve. It was this foundation upon which wakashudo would later be built. Wakashudo, the path of youth and honor, wakashudō, often called the way of youth, was far more than a romantic framework. It was a cultural institution that shaped the emotional and psychological development of young samurai. It described a structured bond between an older warrior ninja and a younger trainee wakashu, rooted in mentorship, discipline, loyalty, and sometimes intimacy. The relationship was not simply personal. It was understood to mold the youth into a more refined, honorable, and disciplined warrior. The ninja was expected to guide the youth, teaching not only combat techniques but also comportment, poetry, etiquette, and emotional restraint. The wakashu, in turn, owed absolute loyalty, obedience, and dedication. This dynamic created a partnership where affection was entangled with duty. To us, the arrangement may appear ethically ambiguous, but to samurai society, it was codified and regulated. Entire clans had unwritten rules about how these bonds should be conducted, how long they should last, and what responsibilities each partner carried. What made wakashudō so powerful was its emotional intensity. The young warrior's identity was shaped entirely by his mentor's approval. The mentor's reputation was strengthened by the youth's progress. Their lives became intertwined through training, shared hardship, nighttime guard shifts, and monastic studies. This closeness naturally created bonds that were deeper than typical teacher-student relationships. Some evolved into deep emotional partnerships. Others remained purely pedagogical, but still carried an intimacy formed by discipline and trust. The samurai believed that a youth who learned through such a bond developed greater bravery. Fighting alongside someone you were emotionally tied to strengthened resolve, Dying in battle was meaningful when your last thoughts belonged to someone who shaped you. Samurai literature from this era often speaks of devotion brighter than the blade and a loyalty shaped by affection. These phrases reflect the cultural logic that made wakashudō a cornerstone of warrior development. As time passed, this system became both respected and controversial, admired for its ability to forge exceptional warriors, yet whispered about for its intimacy. But for centuries, wakashudō defined the emotional backbone of samurai training. Oaths, bonds, and vows. How samurai defined loyal love. Samurai relationships, especially those rooted in wakashudō, were governed by a dense web of ritualistic vows and codes.
Ow.
These were not casual promises. They were binding agreements that carried moral, social, and sometimes even spiritual weight. Breaking such vows could lead to disgrace, exile, or violence, keeping them elevated a warrior's honor. The word love in this context did not resemble modern romance. It was defined through loyalty, sacrifice, and seriousness of intent. One of the most important rituals was the chugari, an oath-binding ceremony. During this, mentor and youth swore mutual loyalty, sometimes exchanging written vows or symbolic tokens. These ceremonies were performed privately, in the presence of deities or ancestral shrines, emphasizing that the bond was blessed, or at least witnessed, by spiritual forces. To betray a chugari oath was a moral crime comparable to betraying one's clan. Another element was the expectation of exclusivity. These bonds were meant to be singular and focused. A ninja who formed too many youth bonds risked accusations of emotional instability or manipulation. Youth who divided loyalty among multiple mentors was seen as unreliable and untrustworthy. The samurai world prized clarity. A man could have many comrades, but only one true bond of this intimate magnitude at a time. These oaths also served a political function. A samurai knew he could trust the youth who had sworn loyalty to him. The youth knew he was protected by the older warrior's influence. Clans used these bonds to reinforce internal unity. During chaotic eras, these personal loyalties often mattered more than formal hierarchy. A man might betray a commander he barely knew, but never the mentor who guided him from adolescence through battle after battle. To the samurai, loyal love was defined not by softness, but by obligation, trust, and sacrifice. It meant defending one another's honor, keeping each other's secrets, and maintaining discipline, not out of fear, but out of devotion to the bond itself. Temple warriors and erotic brotherhoods, the monastic influence. Before the samurai rose to full power, Japan's mountain temples were home to a unique class of warrior monks known as sai. These monks lived in mal-only communities, training in martial arts, scripture, and ascetic discipline. They often served as protectors of temple lands, engaging in warfare with rival sects or political enemies. Their influence on samurai culture was profound, especially in shaping ideas of spiritual companionship and ritualized intimacy. In monastic life, bonds between elder and youth were not merely tolerated, they were institutionalized. These relationships were structured through strict rules emphasizing spiritual mentorship, discipline, and moral development. Some were romantic. Many were deeply emotional without erotic expression. The monks believed that a youth's character could be shaped by a mentor's affection just as surely as by his instruction. These ideas filtered into samurai academies, where young warriors were sent for early education. Temple diaries revealed that brotherhood contracts vows of lifelong loyalty were common. These contracts were rarely erotic by modern standards, yet they held an intimacy that blurred lines. Warriors trained in temples carried these ideas back to their clans. The concept of forging a bond through devotion, discipline, and shared hardship became part of samurai culture long before bushido emerged. What made monastic influence distinct was its philosophical grounding. Affection was framed as a path to enlightenment, the mentor guiding the youth not only in martial skill, but in self-control, humility, and moral contemplation. Even when these bonds included erotic undertones, monks explained them as forms of spiritual unity, not indulgence. When samurai adopted these structures, they stripped away the overt religious framing but preserved the emotional architecture. Thus, the warrior class inherited a deeply complex relationship system, part spiritual, part hierarchical, part affectionate, part disciplinary. Without the monastic influence, wakashudo might never have existed in the form we recognize today. Mentorship or control. The hierarchy beneath the relationship. At the heart of wakashudo lay a system of hierarchy as rigid as any military structure. The older warrior, the ninja, held absolute social and moral authority over the youth. To modern eyes, this dynamic can appear deeply imbalanced, even coercive. But in samurai society, hierarchy was the foundation of life itself. Every relationship was structured vertically: lord over vassal, master over apprentice, elder over junior. The bond between ninja and wakashu simply mirrored this larger cultural order. The mentor's responsibility extended beyond teaching combat. He shaped the youth's worldview, emotional discipline, sense of loyalty, and understanding of honor. The youth depended on him for protection, advancement, and social education. This dependency created intimacy, but also vulnerability. A ninja who abused his authority could ruin a youth's future. Conversely, a devoted mentor could elevate a youth from obscurity to influence within the clan. The line between mentorship and control was thin, shifting constantly based on personality and circumstance. It is difficult to generalize these bonds, because they varied dramatically. Some mentors behaved with compassion, patience, and genuine emotional investment. Others treated the youth harshly, demanding unwavering obedience. Some bonds were affectionate partnerships. Others resembled strict master-apprentice hierarchies. Samurai literature contains both tender references to youths cherished like younger brothers and stark accounts of exploitation disguised as discipline. The structure allowed for both. What made this dynamic particularly intense was the emotional expectation imposed on the youth. A wakashu was expected to admire the mentor, internalize his teachings, and see him as the ideal model of warrior conduct. This emotional loyalty created an aura of devotion that could resemble romantic attachment, even when the relationship was not physically intimate. The youth's identity was shaped not by private desire, but by the expectation to reflect and uphold the mentor's honor. This relationship, complex and morally ambiguous, formed the backbone of samurai emotional life. Whether nurturing or controlling, it shaped how young warriors learned to navigate the treacherous world of duty, hierarchy, and loyalty. War camps, isolation, and the birth of male intimacy rules. War camps were pressure cookers, isolated, tense, unpredictable. Samurai lived for weeks or months in tightly packed barracks, surrounded exclusively by men, enduring long nights of waiting, punctuated by bursts of violent conflict. In such environments, emotional support became vital. Warriors shared not only food and shelter, but fears, doubts, and the proximity of death. This closeness fostered bonds that went beyond simple camaraderie. It was in these war camps that many of the unwritten intimacy rules developed. Older warriors took responsibility for guiding youths through the psychological demands of battle. They taught them how to control fear, how to remain calm during night ambushes, and how to mourn fallen comrades without losing focus. Nights spent in shared quarters, listening to distant enemy drums or the howl of the wind often, created intense emotional connections. The youth looked to the mentor not only as a trainer, but as a source of stability in a world that threatened to collapse at any moment. Over time, these camp-born relationships became formalized. Samurai manuals began to describe acceptable and unacceptable behavior, drawing lines between loyalty, affection, and inappropriate dependency. Certain gestures, such as sharing poems, exchanging small personal items, or speaking privately during night watch, were encouraged as signs of trust. Others, like neglecting one's duties for emotional reasons, were heavily criticized. The samurai elite believed that intimacy must serve discipline, not undermine it. While these bonds occasionally deepened into relationships that modern viewers might call romantic, their original purpose was functional. The samurai needed ways to maintain morale in isolation, to keep younger warriors psychologically grounded, and to create cohesion in groups facing constant danger. Emotional closeness was a survival mechanism as much as anything else. Thus, war camps became crucibles in which male intimacy was shaped by necessity, fear, loyalty, and the silent understanding that companionship was often the only shield a warrior had against despair. The hidden contracts, Private agreements between samurai lovers. Among the most revealing relics of samurai intimacy are the private agreements written or oral made between partners. These hidden contracts rarely survive in complete form, but fragments found in temple archives and clan records offer clues to how these relationships operated. They were not marriage contracts, nor were they casual pacts of affection. Instead, they resembled emotional and behavioral codes designed to protect both participants within a demanding and judgmental society. A typical contract outlined commitments such as exclusive loyalty, discretion, mutual protection, and the preservation of each other's honor. Agreements often stated that neither partner would abandon the other in battle or shame the relationship through public impropriety. Such pledges were taken seriously. Violations could lead to social ruin. Some contracts included symbolic tokens, engraved charms, shared poems, or personal objects exchanged as proof of sincerity. Because samurai society valued reputation above nearly everything, these contracts served a stabilizing purpose. They allowed partners to define boundaries, articulate expectations, and ensure that their emotional connection did not undermine their professional duties. They also helped shield the relationship from gossip, jealousy, or clan interference. A bond made official, though privately, was less vulnerable to outside manipulation. What makes these contracts fascinating is their emotional language. They speak of trust deeper than steel, companionship in the shadow of death, and loyalty beyond the strike of an enemy blade. These phrases reveal a worldview in which intimacy was intertwined with martial values. The relationship was not merely personal, it was part of the warrior's moral and psychological foundation. Though most of these contracts have been lost, their existence testifies to a hidden system of emotional governance, proof that samurai intimacy was far more structured, thoughtful, and complex than romanticized tales suggest. Jealousy, violence, and possessiveness in the warrior class. Where emotional intensity exists, jealousy inevitably follows. Samurai relationships, especially those under wakashudō, were fertile ground for conflict. The mentor-youth dynamic created exclusivity, which in turn bred competition. Other warriors might seek favor from the same mentor. Youths might resent rivals who threatened their mentor's attention. Even minor slights could ignite tensions in a culture where honor and reputation were everything. Jealousy often manifested subtly at first. A warrior might spread rumors to undermine a rival, claiming he lacked discipline or loyalty. A youth might challenge another to a sparring match under the guise of training, using the opportunity to humiliate or display dominance. Clan records contain hints of altercations sparked by perceived emotional betrayals. Arguments that escalated into duels, despite official prohibitions against such internal conflict. In more volatile cases, jealousy led to violence. Samurai texts describe incidents where a mentor struck down a rival for attempting to form a bond with his youth, or where a youth lashed out at another who monopolized the mentor's attention. These outbursts were dangerous as they threatened the stability of the clan. Elders often intervened quickly, reprimanding offenders and emphasizing that emotional attachments must never disrupt military discipline. Possessiveness also played a role, especially among mentors who viewed their youth as reflections of their own prestige. A mentor who lost the devotion of his youth risked public embarrassment. A youth who appeared disloyal could be ostracized. Thus, the emotional stakes were high, and the consequences of damaged pride could be severe. These volatile dynamics reveal the double-edged nature of samurai intimacy: deeply supportive when harmonious, deeply dangerous when threatened. When bonds broke, betrayal, revenge, and forbidden attachments, few events shook samurai communities more than the breaking of a sworn bond. To dissolve such a relationship was not simply a personal separation, it was a breach of honor. The reasons varied: jealousy, shifting alliances, political necessity, or personal disillusionment. But whenever a bond fractured, the fallout rippled through the clan. A youth who abandoned his mentor risked losing social protection. A mentor who dismissed his youth without cause appeared cruel or unstable. And when a bond ended due to betrayal, such as a partner forming an intimate connection elsewhere, the emotional repercussions could be explosive. Samurai diaries reference instances of men taking extreme measures to avenge broken bonds, ranging from challenges to duels to quiet acts of sabotage. Forbidden attachments A relationship that crossed clan boundaries or involved someone of inappropriate rank were particularly dangerous. A youth involved with a higher-ranking samurai outside his clan could be accused of espionage. A mentor who pursued someone under his command without clan approval risked political backlash. These forbidden attachments were tolerated in private but condemned publicly as they threatened loyalty structures. Occasionally, broken bonds led to acts of surprising grace. A mentor might release his youth to pursue another path out of compassion. A youth might withdraw out of a desire to avoid harming his mentor's reputation. But such outcomes were rare. More often, the breaking of bonds revealed the rigid and emotionally charged nature of samurai society. In these stories of betrayal and forbidden attachment, we glimpse the darker side of samurai intimacy, one where desire and duty collided, often violently. Shifting morality. When Japan turned against samurai sexual codes, for centuries, the practices surrounding wakashudō were viewed not as scandalous secrets, but as established regulated customs within the warrior class. Yet no tradition remains untouched forever. As Japan entered the late medieval and early Edo periods, the nation began adopting new moral frameworks, ones that clashed sharply with the emotional and intimate systems samurai had long considered natural. Suddenly, relationships that once symbolized loyalty and guidance were criticized, reinterpreted, or quietly condemned. The arrival of Neo-Confucian philosophies, especially under the early Tokugawa shogunate, introduced rigid moral binaries. Confucian scholars emphasize hierarchical family structures, patriarchal duty, and sexual restraint. Their writings framed male-male intimacy as a distraction from filial obligations and social order. This was not a sudden shift, nor was it universally accepted. Samurai, deeply rooted in older traditions, resisted these new ideas, arguing that emotional bonds between men had shaped warriors for generations. But Confucian morality had political weight, and the shogunate valued order above all. This ideological transformation created a cultural tension that was subtle at first. Officials did not outright ban wakashudō, but they began discouraging it through commentary, moral instruction, and revised educational policies. Writings from this era reveal a tone of embarrassment and reinterpretation. Chroniclers reframed historical relationships as purely symbolic, minimizing emotional depth to align with new standards. Teachers instructed youths to focus on loyalty to lords and family, not to individual mentors. Yet beneath the surface, old practices lingered. Bonds continued in private, though cloaked in discretion. Warriors still exchanged poems and oaths, though with heightened caution. Desire did not vanish, it merely adapted to a culture that now judged it more harshly. The shift in morality did not erase samurai intimacy, changed how it was spoken about, written about, and remembered. What had once been a socially accepted tradition now existed in a dimming light, slowly receding into the shadows of Japan's warrior past. This was the beginning of the end for the once structural codes of samurai intimacy, the rise of Neo-Confucian law, and the policing of intimacy. The Tokugawa government, seeking to stabilize a country recovering from centuries of civil war, installed an ideological regime built on Neo-Confucian order. This ideology shaped not just political life, but personal morality. Samurai became enforcers of the new ethical system, expected to embody restraint, propriety, and adherence to familial duty. In this environment, intimate bonds between men came under increasing scrutiny, not through criminalization, but through social and administrative pressure. Confucian scholars argued that intimacy between men threatened the patriarchal household model. A young samurai devoted emotionally to a mentor might neglect marriage, producing fewer heirs. Mentor emotionally tied to a youth might undermine clan loyalty by prioritizing personal affection. Such fears led to the creation of etiquette manuals that explicitly discouraged emotional attachments outside family structures. Some domains implemented codes urging samurai to focus on appropriate companionship, a euphemism for heteronormative expectations. This shift reshaped samurai life in tangible ways. Marriages, once political arrangements of convenience, became moral obligations. Young warriors were encouraged to wed early and produce heirs, reducing the space in which older intimacy systems could operate. Clan elders monitored relationships between youths and mentors more closely, intervening when bonds appeared too intense or distracting. Samurai academies revised their teachings, omitting references to earlier intimacy practices and instead emphasizing obedience to the family and the state. But not all samurai adapted easily. Many resented the new moral constraints, seeing them as artificial impositions that clashed with centuries of warrior tradition. Confidential letters from this era reveal private frustrations. Older warriors lamented the loss of personal bonds that once shaped loyalty, while younger ones expressed confusion about shifting expectations. The emotional landscape of samurai culture became a battleground between tradition and state-imposed morality. Through laws and ideology, Neo-Confucian influence did not merely police behavior, it began erasing the memory of what samurai intimacy once meant. The ones who fought the system, rebels of desire in a strict age, even under the rising tide of Confucian morality. Not all samurai accepted the new rules quietly. Across domains, there were warriors who resisted, defied, or subtly subverted the codes imposed by the state. Some did so out of passion, others out of loyalty to older traditions. These rebels of desire left faint but fascinating traces in letters, poetry, and scandal reports recorded by clan officials. Some resistance was quiet and discreet. Older mentors continued forming deep bonds with their youths but cloaked these connections behind religious devotion or private instruction. Youths who felt trapped by clan expectations often sought emotional refuge in secret companionships, meeting in hidden temple gardens or unused barracks after nightfall. These clandestine relationships were not just acts of affection, they were acts of defiance against a system that sought to regulate the most intimate corners of their lives. Other rebellions were more dramatic. Clan records mention duels sparked not by political rivalries, but by disputes over forbidden attachments. Warriors confronted elders who attempted to separate bonded partners, challenging authority in ways unthinkable in earlier eras. In one documented case, 2 samurai fled their domain entirely, choosing exile over forced separation. Their story became a whispered legend among younger warriors, a rare testament to loyalty outweighing fear of punishment. There were also intellectual rebels, scholars and poets who wrote defenses of male companionship disguised as philosophical commentary. They framed intimacy between men as an expression of pure loyalty, superior to the distractions of worldly marriage. Though these writings circulated privately, they offered a counter-narrative to the prevailing moral climate, preserving fragments of the older warrior ethos. These resistance stories illuminate the tension at the heart of late samurai culture, a struggle between personal devotion and ideological conformity. Even as official morality tightened its grip, human desire found ways to survive in the shadows. Erasure. How Meiji Japan buried these traditions. The final decisive blow to samurai intimacy traditions came with the Meiji Restoration in 1868, as Japan rushed to modernize and reshape itself into a Western style. Nation-state, samurai culture, once the backbone of society, was dismantled with astonishing speed. In the process, elements of their emotional and intimate world were deliberately erased to craft a new, respectable national identity. Modernization brought Western moral frameworks, missionary influences, and Victorian concepts of sexuality. Japanese scholars, eager to portray Japan as a civilized nation in Western eyes, sanitized samurai history. Texts discussing wakashudō were dismissed as immoral remnants. Some were destroyed. Others were rewritten. Families edited clan archives to remove references that could be interpreted as inappropriate by Western observers. School curriculums reframed samurai life as austere, heterosexual, devoted solely to loyalty and self-sacrifice. Government-approved histories portrayed the warrior class as paragons of marital fidelity. Ignoring the centuries in which emotional bonds between men formed part of the fabric of military life, the older warrior codes messy, emotional complex were replaced by a clean, rigid narrative better suited to nation-building. Even temples altered their records. Monastic communities, fearing persecution under the new moral regime, removed passages describing intimate bonds between monks and novices. Shrines that had once hosted private oath ceremonies now emphasized national unity. The archives of warrior houses were purged, and future generations grew up believing the sanitized myth. The Meiji era did not merely suppress samurai intimacy, it buried it under a new definition of Japanese virtue. What remained was a hollow image, a warrior stripped of emotional depth, frozen in an idealized pose of martial masculinity. But the truth, of course, was never fully destroyed, only hidden. Legacy and myth. What survives today of samurai sexual culture? Though much of samurai intimacy culture was erased or distorted during the Meiji period, the fragments that survived offer invaluable insight into a lost world. Today, historians, literary scholars, and cultural anthropologists work to reconstruct this hidden landscape from poems, legal documents, temple diaries, and scattered accounts that escape censorship. What emerges is not a single narrative, but a tapestry, complex, contradictory, deeply human. Modern scholarship acknowledges that samurai intimacy was neither universally accepted nor universally condemned. It occupied a liminal space between affection, mentorship, discipline, and power. These relationships shaped loyalty structures, influenced warrior ethics, and left echoes in samurai literature, theater, and visual art. Traces of wakashudō can still be found in kabuki performances, Edo woodblock prints, and even regional folklore describing heroic pairs whose devotion transcended ordinary friendship. The myths that survive today often blur the line between truth and legend. Some depict samurai lovers as tragic figures torn apart by duty. Others portray them as paragons of loyalty whose devotion fortified them in battle. While these stories cannot always be verified, they reveal how deeply these bonds were woven into Japan's cultural memory, so deeply that erasure could never fully succeed. Most importantly, this legacy forces modern audiences to reconsider the samurai myth. These warriors were not one-dimensional symbols of stoic masculinity. They were human beings, navigating an emotionally intense, hierarchical world where intimacy served both personal need and social function. Their hidden relationships remind us that history is never as simple as the textbooks claim. What survives today is not a complete record, but a powerful truth. The emotional lives of the samurai were far more complex, deeply connected, and painfully human than the myths that replaced them. And so we close the final chapter of a world Japan tried to forget. Behind the rigid armor, behind the cold steel, behind the myth of perfect discipline, there lived warriors whose hearts were shaped by bonds the modern world no longer has words for. Some of these relationships forged loyalty stronger than iron, some created conflict, jealousy, and betrayal, and some simply reflected the human need for connection in a violent, uncertain age. The samurai left behind stories of valor and brutality, but they also left shadows. Faint traces of emotion carved between the lines of censored scrolls and forgotten diaries. Today, we can only piece together what survives: a secret code of desire, mentorship, devotion, and discipline, a hidden world erased by politics, morality, and time. But in those fragments, we find something uncomfortable and beautiful. The truth that even the fiercest warriors sought connection, and even the symbols of masculinity carried vulnerabilities that history tried to bury. Thank you for walking through these shadows. If this story opened a door you didn't know existed, if it revealed a truth beneath the samurai myth, or if you want more forbidden, forgotten, and buried parts of history, subscribe. This is where the stories others are afraid to tell finally breathe again. Like this. Comment your favorite chapter, or the next taboo topic you want unearthed. Share this documentary with someone who loves the darker corners of history. The past is full of secrets. Here we refuse to let them stay buried.